The deal is already dead. That's what history tells us before the negotiations are even over. And if Iran doesn't sign, Trump has made it very clear what comes next. I've studied every round of nuclear negotiations since the 2015 agreement. What I found was a pattern almost no one is talking about. Every time the West presents an ultimatum, Iran takes one more step forward in its enrichment program. It doesn't step back. It advances. Let me show you the map of what's really at stake here. According to IAEA reports, Iran today has enough uranium enriched to 60% to build, if it decided to take that step, several nuclear devices. That's not my assessment. That's the International Atomic Energy Agency's own 2025 findings. The technical threshold was crossed months ago. What remains is a political decision.
Trump's threat is not a new ultimatum. It is the public acknowledgement that the contract between the West and Iran has been broken for years, and that no one in the mainstream media wants to say it out loud. Let's go back to the map. In 2015, the JCPOA drew an invisible border. Iran freezes its program, the West lifts sanctions. It was a contract that depended on both sides trusting each other. In 2018, Trump unilaterally withdrew the United States. From Tehran's perspective, the West broke the deal first. And here is what almost no one says openly. They are right on that specific point. The American withdrawal was the first breach of the contract. Iran responded with a strategy that geopolitical analysts call capability expansion as negotiating currency. Every time sanctions tighten, they enrich more uranium. Not necessarily to build a bomb, but to have something to offer in exchange for economic relief. Nuclear territory became their bargaining chip. But that strategy has a technical limit. When you cross certain enrichment thresholds, the international community can no longer look away. Israel, in particular, has a well-documented doctrine. It will not allow Iran to reach operational nuclear capability. That is not rhetoric. It is verified state policy dating back to the Begin era. Here is the economic factor that defines the entire board. Current sanctions cost Iran, according to IMF estimates, between $50 and $70 billion annually in unrealized oil revenues. The Iranian rial has lost more than 80% of its value over the past decade. The population feels it every time they go to the market. The government feels it every time it meets payroll. That creates an internal pressure that geopolitical analyses routinely ignore. The regime needs a deal not only for diplomatic reasons, but for domestic economic survival. And Trump knows it. That is why maximum pressure works as a short-term negotiating tactic. But it also creates the central dilemma. If Iran concedes too quickly, the regime appears weak internally. If it doesn't concede, sanctions deepen and the economy keeps collapsing. It's a trap. Any move in any direction carries a cost. And Trump, by declaring that the shooting starts if Iran breaks the deal, is speaking the language of that map. It is not an irrational threat from the logic of maximum pressure. It is the public articulation of a red line that existed tacitly for years. What the media is not saying is that this threat also has secondary audiences. Israel is listening. Saudi Arabia is listening. The Gulf states that normalized relations with Israel under the Abraham Accords are listening. Trump is drawing borders for the entire region, not just for Tehran. Iran has three paths on the map. First, sign a deal with significant concessions, get immediate economic relief, but surrender nuclear capability and appear to be yielding under pressure. Cost, internal legitimacy, vulnerability to hardline factions within the regime. Second, maintain the current posture, negotiate slowly, buy time. Cost, sanctions continue, the economy keeps deteriorating, the risk of Israeli or American military action increases. Third, openly declare there will be no deal and accelerate the nuclear program. Cost, military response is almost guaranteed. None of the three options is good. That is what makes this situation generate that knot in the stomach that is hard to ignore. Scenario 1. A limited deal within weeks. Possible if internal economic pressure in Iran surpasses resistance from hardline factions. The regime agrees to freeze enrichment in exchange for partial sanctions relief. Fragile, like all the ones before. Scenario 2. Extended negotiations with no resolution. The most likely pattern based on documented history. Iran negotiates, delays, buys time. Sanctions hold, but don't escalate. An unstable equilibrium that could last months. Scenario 3. Collapse of negotiations followed by unilateral Israeli action. If Iran crosses a specific technical threshold, Israel acts without waiting for American authorization. That would put Trump in a reactive position, not a proactive one. Scenario 4. A comprehensive deal including regional actors. The least likely in the short term, but the only one that would resolve the problem structurally. It would require concessions from every actor on the map, including Saudi Arabia and Israel. What it means for you, 90 SEC. If you're someone who follows these negotiations because you want to understand where global energy, financial markets, and international security are heading, this is what you need to know. Every time this process breaks down, oil prices react. The supply chains running through the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly 20% of the world's oil passes, according to the EIA, are put at risk. The desperation you feel when you see that no agreement is being reached is, in fact, the rational response to a problem that has been building for decades and that neither side has been willing to resolve structurally. That's not pessimism. That's a correct reading of the map. So where does that leave us? The original contract broke in 2018. Since then, both sides have been negotiating in the ruins of that agreement. Iran has more nuclear capability than ever. Sanctions have damaged its economy but not changed its policy. Trump has drawn a line in explicit language. Israel is watching with its own doctrine, and the world is waiting for a deal that, based on history, will arrive late, be incomplete, and leave the fundamental problems unresolved. The question I'll leave you with is this. If every nuclear agreement with Iran has failed or been abandoned since 2015, what would have to be different this time for it to actually work? Write it in the comments. I want to hear how you see it.